Thank you so much, JC. And it's interesting that Susan Dumoulin was originally going to read this because she said when I asked her that this was actually the passage that she used when she gave her retirement sermon here. She'd worked here for 14 years, and this is the passage she used, the idea of kind of the old guard moving on and then giving their powers and their work and ministry to the next group of people. So I think that's really beautiful. So thank you so much, JC, for uplifting Susan today, and we hope she heals and feels better soon. So I think this is a great passage to preach on today because it's very dramatic. Elijah is always very dramatic, so of course he has to die by going up to heaven in a whirlwind of fire. And it's a perfect thing. We need lots of drama for Pride, so I thought it was quite perfect. But it's also in the lectionary, so it just happens to fit quite well. And so for folks who don't have the whole Hebrew Bible memorized, which I don't know, maybe some of you do, which would be amazing. Elijah was a prophet who lived in the northern kingdom of Israel during the 9th century BCE. And he was pretty much larger than life. Like everything he did was big and dramatic like this. So he lived during the reign of King Ahab, whose name might sound familiar to you, and Queen Jezebel, whose name I'm quite certain sounds familiar to you. There's another minister I'm friends with who said one time she was preaching somewhere in the prairies, and someone stood up and called her a Jezebel. And she took that as a sign that she was doing something right. Yes, that's kind of fun. And Minister Bingo, like, well, has anyone ever called you a Jezebel? Wow, so pretty cool. But yes, so Queen Jezebel is quite famous. And these stories, the stories of Elijah and Elisha, are mostly recounted in the books of Kings. And so this royal couple, Ahab and Jezebel, they worshipped Baal. And especially it said that before this, King Ahab was more of a Yahwehist, who followed the same God as the God of Abraham. But then when he married Queen Jezebel, she was quite devoted to Baal. And so over time, the king became devoted to Baal as well, and let the prophets of Baal kind of control everything in the land. And so they were known for that. And Elijah really stood up against him. So in Elijah, there are so many stories of him standing up to speak out against the king and queen at that time because of their devotion to Baal. And what he said was them following idolatry and also their unjust ways of ruling the land. So they would steal land from the poor, and they would fight these armies and raise these big armies at the time and didn't treat the land well and didn't treat the poor well, and were also not following the way of Yahweh. And so Elijah came into conflict with them. And he warned them that if they kept this up, there would be great devastation in the land. There would be a catastrophic drought and then a famine. And they didn't listen, and that's exactly what happened. So for many years, there are so many stories of Elijah where he's having to deal with the drought. So one of the most famous stories is he comes to the widow, and she's starving, and she doesn't have anything, and he's able to get her enough food and water to keep her going. And then her son dies, and he's actually able to restore her son to life. And that's the first story in the Bible of someone getting brought back to life. And there are lots of similarities between Elijah and Moses, and then also Elijah and Jesus. So much so that when Jesus came, people thought at the time that he was the second coming of Elijah. And if you remember the transfiguration, when Jesus comes up out of the water after his baptism, he sees Moses and he sees Elijah because they're so intertwined in lots of ways. And one of those ways was in being able to raise the dead, which before that was unheard of. One of the dramatic stories of Elijah is he challenged the 450 prophets of Baal to see who could sacrifice a bull without using any fire. And so it said that he said, okay, if your God is so amazing, see what you can do on your own if your God Baal will come to you. So they sacrificed a bull and they set it up and they made the altar for it and put wood, and then they waited and there was no fire. And then he said, and he starts taunting them and says, see, I knew that's what was going to happen because Baal doesn't listen to you the way God works with me. So then he did the same thing with another bull. I feel very bad for the bulls at this time, where he sacrificed another bull, and it said that he got 4 big jugs of water, and he poured the water over the sacrifice just to prove that it wasn't some trickery of some kind. So it was really saturated with water. And then he prayed to God and said, show them what you can do. And suddenly a burst of lightning came down and set the bull on fire and burned the altar, and it said it even boiled the water in that area. And this was a sign to the people that Yahweh was the God who would actually answer their prayers and who would bring water. So they ended up killing the 450 prophets. This was quite a dramatic story. Killing the 450 prophets. And it said as soon as those died, those who were following Baal, it started raining for the first time in years. And that was the end of the famine and the end of the drought. And after this time, Elijah went back and visited Mount Horeb. And you remember Mount Horeb is where Moses received the 10 Commandments. And Elijah is the only one in the whole rest of the Bible who actually goes to Mount Horeb. I guess they spent 40 years trying to get back from there, so no one wanted to try to find it again. But it said it took him about 40 days because he had a map, so he knew how to get there. And so he went and he was praying in the cave and asking for God to come to him. And so God sent a lot of these natural disasters. There are all these big natural disasters associated with Elijah. So if you remember, he sends a big windstorm. What is it? He sends a mighty wind and then an earthquake and then a fire. But it said God, he doesn't see God in any of these. And then finally he keeps praying and he hears God in the still small voice and realizes God is inside of him. And in meditating in the cave in that way, that's where he has this amazing spiritual experience. And he realizes this is how I'm going to carry on my work. So he leaves and he goes looking for Elisha. And he knows Elisha will be the one who's going to follow him after this. And eventually he finds Elisha, and Elisha has 12 yokes of oxen. And 12 is an important number. Sometimes we talk about numerology here. 12 is like the 12 tribes of Israel. And so that's a sign that he's the one who's going to be his successor. And he puts his mantle on him. And the mantle, like is mentioned here, is just like the big cloak. And it's what prophets would wear as a sign that they've been called by God. It's the same kind of thing when we wear a stole. That's the mantle, saying that God is with us. And he puts his mantle on Elisha and says, you're going to be my successor. And together they found this whole school of prophets. And they do what they can to try to restore the land after this big famine, to try to feed the hungry, to try to help those who've died and restore some kind of semblance of order. And then finally, towards the end of his life, Elijah knows he's going to die, but he isn't quite ready. So he keeps telling Elisha, they'll go somewhere and he'll say, now you stay here and do the ministry here and I'll go on. But Elisha's so loyal and he says, no, I'm going to come with you. So they stop in multiple places and Elisha keeps following him. And finally, we have the story here where again, a call back to Moses, where he puts his cloak or his mantle in the water and it parts the water so they can walk across. So he's the one most associated with Moses. And they're able to get across. And then Elisha says, he says, what would you ask of me? And Elisha says, I want double the kind of power that you have, that kind of connection to God. And that would have been understood as what an eldest son would have asked for from the father. So if the father or the family, they have a certain inheritance, you ask for like twice the share of what the younger siblings get. So that's what Elisha asked for. And Elijah says, okay, if you are the one, you'll be able to see me when I ascend. And so Elijah actually ascends into heaven. And there are only 3 or arguably 4 people who ascend into heaven without dying first. So the first is Enoch, who's Methuselah's father. So that's back in previous times. It said he just went up and was gone. And then it's Elijah, and later it's Jesus. And according to Roman Catholic and Orthodox tradition, the Virgin Mary also ascends into heaven. So it's this amazing way. Suddenly, again, there's lots of drama with natural disasters here. So it's fire again comes from the sky, like it did before with the prophets and killing the bull. And fire comes down, but this time it takes Elijah up into heaven. And I thought that it's a really interesting analogy with the whirlwind, because it's said to be in a whirlwind. And the only other times that word is used in the Hebrew Bible, one is when Job is talking to God, and God wants to show Job how like big and powerful God is, so he appears in a whirlwind like that. But otherwise, it's when God is upset. Then God appears in this big whirlwind. It's a sign of destruction. But it's actually really beautiful, because during Elijah's time, he was living in a time of great chaos and destruction. But he was always trying to heal the land, take care of the marginalized, help the people. And by doing that, kind of these natural disasters, or like things that would normally be destructive, actually work to his benefit, with the fire coming down, with the big rainstorms, with God sending him earthquakes and all these kinds of things. So then it's fitting that in the end, Elijah actually ascends into heaven in one of these big disasters. And he leaves Elisha. And so Elisha, sometimes folks know about Elijah, but maybe not Elisha. My favorite story about Elisha, and any of you who are bald will appreciate this story, is when he's walking and a bunch of little schoolboys are taunting him about being bald. So he calls to the bears, and 2 female bears come out and start attacking the boys for making fun of him. So any of you who are bald and someone's kind of being mean about it, you're like, think about Alicia. Do you really want me to summon some bears right now? So that kind of connection to nature. But Alicia goes on, just like he asked for, to perform twice as many miracles as Elijah did. So these include purifying the waters of Jericho next to the Jordan River. He helps end a drought in the east and bring victory over the local warring tribes that are kind of coming in from Jordan and attacking. He helped save a widow by multiplying her oil so she had extras so she could sell it. He cured a Syrian military commander of leprosy. He raised 2 children from the dead. So again, before Elijah had raised 1 person from the dead, so Elisha gets twice as much of everything. So he raises 2 people from the dead. And actually, I don't know if you all know this, he fed over 100 people with just 20 loaves of bread, leaving leftovers. And I don't know if a story like that sounds familiar. I feel like we might have another story, or something like that. So he was the first one to do that. So you definitely want to invite him to dinner parties. So long as you don't mind bald people. You don't want to make fun of bald people. So he had this amazing legacy, this amazing life. And again, the whole time was helping those who were harmed. So helping clean up the environment, helping care for those who were hungry, helping care for the widows, those who were sick and dying, and really caring for the marginalized. So he was so loyal to Elijah, and in being so loyal, he was able to continue on that legacy. And so then, as we mentioned before, this is a Pride service today. And the reason is this is during National Pride Month. And also yesterday was the 56th anniversary of the Stonewall riots. And so for folks who don't know all the details, so the Stonewall riots were a series of riots against a police raid that took place at the Stonewall Inn in Greenwich Village in New York City back in the 60s. So the Stonewall Inn was popular among the poorest and most marginalized people in the gay community. These included drag queens, the trans community, effeminate young men, and homeless youth. And so this was it was a gathering place for kind of folks who were marginalized, not just because they're part of the gay community, but even those within the gay community who were kind of ostracized in other places. And unfortunately at this time, it was really common for police to do raids on gay bars and different areas where gay people were gathering at that time. But in this situation, because it was kind of the poorest of the poor, situation like that, the police raided on a Friday night when the crowds were at their biggest, and they hadn't warned anyone ahead of time that they were coming, so no one could leave. They tried to arrest the whole group. And in this area, there were lots of members of the queer community, and they saw the police attacking. And so it ended up, rather than it working in the police's benefit to be able to arrest those, it just instilled more anger in the people around them. So it actually gathered more people from the wider community to come help and support them. So in the days following this, there were several more protests, bigger and bigger, and it ended up kicking off the gay rights movement that we have today for queer people in so many ways. And so that's what started it. So they were trying to live their life. They were trying to have a place of belonging, a place where they could be and get to know each other and feel loved and respected. But by having the police come down on them in that way, it ended up sparking widespread anger and leading to all the changes that have happened since that time. So we want to honor the Stonewall riots and the Pride movement that's continued to today. But also, as we know, the work is far from over. So just like how Elijah didn't say, okay, I fixed injustice, I restored the environment, I get to just pass away now, and everything's good, and you don't have anything to worry about. Got to kind of hand it on to the next generation. So try to be the 7th fire generation. So still, queer rights are threatened in so many places around the world. I don't think I have to tell you that. I think we're well aware. Unfortunately, here in Canada, it's said that since 2022, there's been almost a 70% increase in hate crimes towards people based on their sexual orientation. So hate crimes are actually going up. In Alberta, there's lots of legislation being passed and being submitted saying, I don't know, let's walk back trans rights, let's prevent medical care for trans folks or gender-affirming care. Every time there's a book banning of some kind, it has to do with something around queer rights. And then as we know, in lots of other countries, queer rights are being threatened in so many places. In Hungary, just I think last year, they started banning pride marches, and there are lots of protests this month because of it. In El Salvador, there are lots increasing hate crimes, again, against the queer community, and same-sex marriage is banned. In Uganda, as you know, it criminalizes same-sex relationships up to and including the death penalty or life imprisonment for being in consensual same-sex relationships. Russia has designated the LGBTQ movement as extremist. They've even outlawed the rainbow flag. So just any of the stuff that we have in here today, or even this shirt, would get me arrested in Russia. And as we know, the US rights are being walked back in so many different states and across the US. The US just yesterday refused to sign a statement protecting queer people from hate speech and hate crimes. Canada, Australia, Brazil, and several European countries signed it, but the US didn't. And more, there are more bills being introduced that will walk back rights for queer folks. One of my good trans friends who I met here in Vancouver is from the States, and he just announced yesterday that he left and he's moved to Europe, where luckily he has status because he doesn't feel safe there. And I have several other trans friends and gay friends and queer friends in the States who've said, wait a minute, you were able to move to Canada. How did you do that? What lawyer did you use? Do you have anyone you can recommend? What do we do if our rights are quelled? What can we do about it? And so it's a really scary time. And again, that's kind of living into that seventh fire prophecy, that you don't get kind of the new age of people who wake up and say materialism isn't helping us, isolationism isn't helping us, consumerism is hurting us, the degradation of the environment is hurting us. Things get to a boiling point. And I think we really have that now. And it's not just the queer movement. There are so many protests going on. I didn't get to take part in it because I was camping this week, but I'm so grateful to folks in this community and in others who took part in a vigil for Gaza this last week. I guess we got 150 postcards signed. I think maybe it was more than 150. 190, thank you, signed and sent to the government saying we got to get food. It was bread, not bombs. That was the purpose of the vigil, bread, not bombs, into Gaza. And so it's a really scary time for all of us who are in any kind of marginalized community. We see the raids going on in the US, the big ICE raids and the big protests in LA and across the US. We see various ways that rights are being threatened here in Canada and in other parts of the world. And it's a really scary time. And for anyone who has kids, I know sometimes parents come together and say, I don't even know how to parent in this time. Like, I'm not even sure what to focus on because there are so many different things that are, areas that need attention right now. But I think part of what we do is we try to have faith. We try to trust that the people who came before us also lived in really difficult, scary, catastrophic times, and somehow they made it through. We try to learn from them as best we can. I entitled the sermon On the Shoulders of Giants. So if we remember the people before us and all that they did to help get us to where we are today and learn from them. And then if we come together in community, how do we support each other? I know my husband's in the Muslim community, and he's a big believer that as much as the different marginalized communities can support each other, then we can be 10 feet tall, right? If we come together in that way. He was so happy years ago, we were at the Pride Parade in Seattle, and he saw that the Latter-day Saints had a float in the Pride Parade that year. And the missionaries had their white button-down shirts and black pants, but they had rainbow ties and rainbow suspenders. And he thought that was the coolest thing ever. And he's like, look, that makes me want to do more to support the Latter-day Saints when they're being threatened in various places. And, as members of the Muslim community, he said, we have to do what we can to support Pride, and, but also other groups that are being threatened. So let's show up for each other. And it's a great joy in my life to get to be a part of this community. I think we really do show up for each other in so many ways. So let's keep doing that. And let's trust that the mantle of those giants before us has been handed down to us. And together we can do it. And inshallah, we can usher in the eighth fire when all can live in peace and equal rights. Let it be so.